Welcome to the 6 Miles to Supper podcast. I'm your host, Kayla Cox, and I've lost over 80 pounds with intermittent fasting 6 days a week, eating whatever I wanted at my meals, taking a cheat day every Sunday, and walking 6 miles a day. And I'm here to help you on your weight loss journey. In this episode, we're going to talk about controlling your emotions. Now, there were two big revelations I had about emotions when I was on the weight loss journey. The first one was to realize that we are not logical creatures, we are emotional creatures. And that was a mistake I had traditionally made when it came to weight loss. I always thought about the logic part of it. Like, I just need more knowledge. I just need to know, the exact right things to eat. And then that will help me lose weight. But then I realized, when I look back on my own history with weight loss, it was not about logic. The reasons I always fell off the wagon or stopped doing the plan had everything to do with emotion. If it was logic, logically, if something works, then you should just stick with it, right? That's the logical thing to do. Logically, you could have steamed kale and steamed boneless, skinless chicken breast and eat nothing but that, and then you would probably lose weight and you'd probably never be overweight. But emotionally, that's like a disaster waiting to happen because nobody's going to want to do that for the rest of their lives. And the second revelation was that you can control your emotions. And this was something that I always kind of thought, well, I can't help how I feel. So if I feel a certain way, that's just how I have to be. And then I realized, in Tony Robbins' book, Awaken the Giant Within, was really helpful on this because he talked about the idea that you really can control your emotions. You can choose to feel different ways about things. Now, before I go any further, I want to make it very clear. I am not saying that you should deny your emotions or that you should feel guilty for any emotion. In fact, I think you should feel all of your feelings, that it's very important to just let yourself feel the thing. I was always bad about trying to stuff down my anger, and I think that's really a bad idea. You shouldn't stuff down anything because, a lot of times I would end up stuffing my face along with my feelings. And I think that every emotion, we can learn from it. Any emotion that you feel in any given situation gives you a clue as to, a lot of times there's maybe something that needs to change about that situation. Like if you find yourself constantly worried about money, well, then maybe the thing is you really do need to get your finances in order. Or, if you are upset about your weight, you find yourself feeling really sad about it, it might really be that you do need to lose weight and you need to do something about it and you need to get on a plan. So it's not that you should just deny your emotions, but instead of just letting yourself feel your feelings and stay stuck in a specific feeling, you can learn to control them. In other words, your emotions shouldn't be running the show. You should run the show and you should, listen to your emotions and take those into account. It's kind of like, when you look at a toddler, and I've had 3 of those in my lifetime, and they're a lot of fun to be around because, man, when they are up, they are up. When they're happy, they are super happy. But, when they're upset, they are really upset. And you can really see what it's like for somebody to just let emotions run the show. And it's not great. It's not ideal because they have these big ups and downs. And part of the job of being a mother is to help your kids learn how to control their emotions, to control their reactions to things. And what I found was I needed a lot of work on that on myself, when I was on the weight loss journey. So how do you actually control your emotions? Like, what does that look like? Now, what it looks like for me is not so much that I can ever prevent the emotion from occurring. Things will make my temper flare. I can't, and I don't think anyone can. I've read a lot about this, and to my knowledge, you really can't prevent that initial gut emotional response. But what you can do is you can then in that next moment decide to deal with it in maybe a different way than you have in the past. So I'll give you a couple of examples from my own weight loss journey and show you how I deal with those emotions differently than I have traditionally. So early on, after I had formed my plan, one thing that would happen from time to time is we would be at an event, and it would be during my fasting window. And people around me would kind of pressure me to eat. They would, and they were not being rude or anything. They were just encouraging me, like, "Oh, come on, eat with me, and have some of this or have some of that." And at first, my initial reaction was kind of like anger. Like, why do these people want me to fail? It's obvious I need to lose weight. So why would they encourage this kind of behavior? But then, I realized, like, okay, that's not helpful to kind of be angry with people, because for one thing, I realized, like, a lot of these people don't even know that I'm fasting. Like, I haven't ever told them that. What I decided for myself was, in those situations, when I really looked at my feelings, one thing I uncovered for myself was, like, there was a part of me that really did want to eat. Like, I kind of felt left out when I was at an event. And, if I was sitting there not eating, it was just not as fun. And so then I decided, okay, I'm going to make a rule for myself. If I'm at an event and there's, food there, and kind of eating is maybe kind of an important part of it, then I will go ahead and eat, and I won't feel bad about it. And that's just part of my plan from here on out. And it worked out for me. I found, that I never had to adjust that rule because I was still able to lose weight with that in place. Another example is, if I step on the scale and the number that I'm seeing is higher than what I would like it to be, and this has happened even in maintenance. I have had times where it's like, oh wow, this is climbing up, and I need to change here. Something's going on, and I need to figure that out. And see, traditionally though, my response would have been anger and sadness, maybe a little panic, like, oh no. And then a lot of times what would happen is I would just throw my arms up in the air and say, I quit. This is just too much stress, and I don't want to deal with it. But instead, what I've learned how to do is just to say, okay, of course, seeing a higher number is not fun. So it's normal to kind of feel negative emotions about this. But let's look at the data, and see what's actually going on. And 99 times out of 100, what has been the case is, I've had a lot of off-plan days. Like, maybe we've been on vacation, or maybe our schedule has just gotten completely thrown off for one reason or the other. Or maybe I've been experimenting with something and it's just been like, okay, this is not quite working. And just learning to look at the data and then say, okay, so there are reasons. It's not just magically the scales moving up. So let's, in the future, let's get back on track. And then by taking, my emotions, letting myself feel them, because it is important to say, hey man, this is not fun for the scale to go up, and then to be honest about it, because obviously if you sit there and lie to yourself and say, oh, I just love it when I see a high number, I mean, you're going to call yourself out on that kind of lie. So don't do that. I would not recommend just trying to put a happy face on it. Just acknowledge, like, okay, this is not good, so what can we do about it? But then there are certain parts of my plan where I kind of have just taken emotion out of the equation. And what has helped me is to commit to things. And what I've seen is that when you truly commit to something, it kind of takes emotion off the table. A way I like to look at this is it's kind of like marriage. When you decide to marry somebody, you say a vow before God, and you say, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. And that means that, once you make that commitment, it's not about your emotions from that point on. It's about the commitment you made. And so you don't wake up every morning and think, do I want to be married today or do I not? No, you've already made that commitment. It's not about how you feel. Like, you're having a bad day. Oh, well, like you're in this for the long haul. And, the same thing kind of has to be true for weight loss. You have to be in it for the long haul. This has got to be a lifestyle change, something you're going to do for the rest of your life. Several years ago, I had a lot of cavities, and I knew part of my problem was I didn't like flossing, and I just wouldn't do it. I would just kind of do it whenever I felt like it. And that was causing a lot of financial stress because, I was always getting a lot of cavities. And then I realized one day, like, okay, instead of going based on my emotions, like whenever I feel like it, I need to just commit to it and just say, this is something I do. And so I did. I just started flossing my teeth every night and just being really committed to that process and disciplined about implementing it. And you know what? I don't get cavities that often now. And so, in a similar vein, that's what it looks like for me as far as weighing every morning. I mean, of course, there are mornings when I wake up in a bad mood or in a sad mood. And do I emotionally want to go in there and get on the scale, especially if it's like I kind of have a feeling, it's around my period. And so, probably there's going to be some water weight. There are plenty of days where I'm like, I don't really want to see that number. But you know what? I don't let my emotions control that. I just say, well, but I committed to weighing every day, so I'm just going to get on the scale. And I do. And I also do my best to try to take the emotion out of the actual weighing process too. I try to look at myself as a third party, like I'm just taking the patient's weight. I really do continue to frame it that way in my mind, and it helps me to just not think of it in this emotional kind of state. And the same holds true with my 6 mile walk. Nowadays I do 6 miles 6 days a week. I used to do 6 miles 7 days a week. I did that in 2016 and again in like 2018. But during maintenance, I kind of have a different rule for myself. But overall, I do have a commitment to myself that I will stay active. And, I do occasionally allow myself to experiment just to make sure that I do want to continue on with the walking 6 miles a day. But what I have found is I do better when I'm walking 6 miles a day. I just do. My day runs more smoothly. My emotions stay on a more even keel. And I enjoy how I feel overall. So in the moment, though, even though I know all these things, like logically, I know all those things. Like, okay, yeah, I mean, man, those days where I get out there and take a walk, it does feel great, and I feel good and everything. But I have to have that commitment, and that commitment that I've made to myself gets me out there in the morning. I mean, there are plenty of mornings where if I were just going based on my emotions, I'd stay in bed, or I would stay inside, depending on the weather, right? But instead, I get out there and I do it because I'm committed to it. And then that commitment, it gets me out there. And then when I'm actually out there, I'm like, wow, I'm so glad I'm out here walking, seeing the sunrise a lot of mornings, and it's enjoyable. And when I'm actually out there, I really do feel good about it. So the point is, if I only went on emotion, I would not be very consistent. And so, committing to something can help you get consistent. So right now, if you're struggling with that consistency piece, which is so important for successful weight loss, try committing and be really careful though, because the problem a lot of people have is that they just commit really like kind of loosey goosey. Like they say, well, I'm going to do this and this and this and this. And you don't really mean it. And that was my problem for a long time. I would flake out on promises I made to myself. But now I don't do that. I'm very slow to make a new commitment to myself. And I'm very slow to ever change one too. And I find that helps me. It helps me, to not be so emotion based. If there's something that I see that needs changing, I think about it for months before I start to implement changes. And the same goes for a new commitment. I'm very, very slow to take on a new commitment. And that has served me really well because I continue to keep the promises that I make to myself. Now, on one final note, I want to encourage you to also pay attention to your hormonal cycles. Now, for us women, this is obvious. We have a period, or most of us do. So there is, a cycle of hormones that happens, and that can really mess with your emotions. And, I would highly recommend that right now you start tracking that. Just, like I do that in my journal. Every morning I write down the date and what day of my cycle it is. And that's been really helpful because I keep notes on, how I feel, my mood, my energy levels and things like that. And now I have the ability to go back and say, okay, like on day 12, how am I normally feeling? And then that can really help me if I'm feeling a certain way, I can look back and say, okay, do I normally kind of start to feel like this during this time of the month? And sure enough, there are so many times where I really do, like it's like clockwork, So that can help you because sometimes what I have seen in my own life is the emotional side of me can kind of distort reality just a little bit. I can start to think, oh, this is such a bad situation, when really, it's just that I am feeling hormonal, and I know that in another week I'm gonna feel fine about this whole thing. So it can be really helpful to just know where you're at in your cycle. And for any guys out there who are listening to this podcast, you also have a hormonal cycle. So, start to learn a little bit about that so that you can see that there really are patterns in our emotions. So, since we are emotional creatures, I want to encourage you that when you are forming your plan, or right now, if you've got a plan and you're just like, it's just not quite working for me for whatever reason, really take your emotions into account. The thing about it is, even if you know this, even if like, okay, we're emotional creatures and yeah, we're not that logical, the thing is, that is our default programming. We are, by default, emotional. So don't depend too much on logic and instead think about your emotions. How are you actually going to feel on this plan? That's why I really encourage people to put a lot of enjoyment into your plan. Don't deny yourself food. Just let yourself eat the foods you love. Eat whatever you want on the plan. Just, tweak, maybe portion sizes or your windows or things like that in order to get down to the weight you want to be at. And think about yourself on your period. Because I think that's a time when a lot of us women, we crave things like chocolate and comfort foods. And so think about, making your plan be something that is sustainable throughout the entire month, especially on your period. So remember, your emotions are really important and they're actually really helpful. They can help you to understand, things about yourself. You can learn a lot about yourself just by paying attention to how you're feeling. But just because you're feeling a certain way, that doesn't mean that you have to, throw out your plan. Instead, tweak your plan so that it works with your emotions, that default emotional state. And then also put in some commitments to yourself. And that way, in the future, when you're feeling, a certain way, you won't let yourself get off track. And instead, you're going to say, well, I committed to this, and that will get you where you want to be on the weight loss journey. So thank you for joining me in this episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Do you want to lose the weight without getting rid of the foods you love and that you'll go back to eating again anyway? My book, The Laid Back Guide to Intermittent Fasting, teaches you how to practice intermittent fasting so that you lose the weight sustainably and keep it off for good. You can get the audiobook read by me for free when you sign up for your 30-day trial of Audible. The link is in the show notes.